Friends, good morning. The subject today, metageometry, is it's sort of a neologism. Metageometry is not a word we find very often, but it's put together in a particular way to convey a particular meaning, and we'll sort of break it down just so we understand, exactly what the word means, and then we'll explore the subject itself. The idea here, though, is that in The Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky, there's a lot of material, and it's written in a way that is not strictly categorical. That is to say, it doesn't necessarily treat one subject and then move on to the next subject. It's very organic, and it grows from one idea to the next. And so to pursue a whole subject such as, say, geometry and how geometry plays into a philosophical concept of the world, of the universe, you have to cull from many different sources within the Secret Doctrine, within the Theosophical literature. So metageometry is a term used for a collation of all of this material throughout the Secret Doctrine. So, but before we get to that, just a little background on the process of learning and why we take on subjects that may seem daunting or complex. In the preface to The Key to Theosophy, Blavatsky says that the book, The Key to Theosophy, is endeavoring to present unfamiliar concepts in a form as simple and in language as clear as possible. That it should succeed in making theosophy intelligible without mental effort on the part of the reader would be too much to expect. But it is hoped that the obscurity still left is of the thought, not of the language, is due to depth, not to confusion. And then she says, this is an interesting phrase she uses, and we'll explore it a little bit. She says, to the mentally lazy or obtuse, theosophy must remain a riddle. For in the world mental as in the world spiritual, each man must progress by his own efforts. The writer cannot do the reader's thinking for him, nor would the latter be any the better off if such vicarious thought were possible. So it sounds a little harsh. Theosophy is not for the mentally lazy or obtuse. But this is not some kind of intellectual elitism. This is really simply emphasizing the importance of one's own effort and one's ability to approach a subject with the mental posture of a student, rather than an expectation that it will just be spoon-fed to you. Mr. Judge puts this idea in a little bit friendlier terms. In The Ocean of Theosophy, he says, "Theosophy is that ocean of knowledge which spreads from shore to shore of the great evolution of sentient beings. Unfathomable in its deepest parts, it gives the greatest minds their fullest scope, yet shallow enough at its shores, it will not overwhelm the understanding of a child." So here you see, theosophy is available to whomever puts forth the effort. If it's a child putting forth the effort, there is material there for the child to understand. If it is for someone who has the ability to go to great depths with it, it is there. It's available for them as well. So with that in mind, this idea sort of has come into modern psychology under the term the growth mindset. And this is the idea that we have the ability to labor intellectually in a certain capacity without giving up, that it won't be spoon-fed to us, and that a growth mindset is really the signature quality to success in life, in education, in our professional lives, personal lives, that we are always striving, always looking for a challenge in the positive sense, something that we feel some sense of validation and enthusiasm for having overcome. So it has its own intrinsic motivation. There's not an extrinsic motivator there. There's also not an extrinsic motivator for learning theosophy. This has to come from within. It has to be something that we ourselves are interested in doing. So onto the subject itself. Again, the word is meta geometry. So we'll go over the. Oops. No. Meta. This is from the Greek originally, so we'll analyze it on that level. Meta really means beyond. In the original Greek, it's a very, it's not a sophisticated, high concept kind of prefix. It really means adjacent to, or attached to, or beside. In Aristotle's metaphysics, which is of course where we are familiar with the prefix meta in a discussion like this, it was the book that came after physics. So it was like the book after physics, so it's metaphysics. But in that book, he does discuss the ideas of, God and the origins of the universe, and it's a sophisticated and what we would call now metaphysical text. So we've come to attribute that meaning to the word meta. The word meta has itself gone sort of beyond what its original Greek meaning was. So it means meta. It can also mean self-reference, that something is drawn from out of itself. It means sort of an abstraction. When you abstract the essence of something and add that on to give you a more complete understanding of it, that's where we would use the word meta. For example, if I were to give a presentation about the key points of how one gives a presentation, it becomes a meta presentation. You're analyzing the thing in itself using the thing itself. This becomes important later on in any sense of self-analysis and progress along a spiritual path. It's always an important effort to become introspective and to draw out of oneself using one's own self to make that analysis. So meta, for these purposes, kind of means beyond, but it also sort of means a reference to itself. Geo, of course, in like geography, it means earth. It originally actually meant like dirt, like earth, but it has come to mean the globe. It comes from the word Gaia. The word George, for example, the name is Geo and Urgos, which is to draw from. So a person whose job it is, Geo Ergos, is someone who draws from the earth. It means a farmer. So that's why it's a very common name across the world. Because the person, Ergos, to urge, to draw forth, demiurge, the creator god, to create from the earth. So geo here means earth, and metry is a profoundly deep word root. It means to measure, like the word meter or metric system or thermometer, the measurement of heat. It's related to the mother, matri, in relation to measuring, a 28-day cycle, menses. All these things are all related to metry. So geometry is really the measurement of the earth. So classic geometry is the idea that we can measure the world around us and we can understand it in some way. That we learn and discover things about ourselves by understanding the world in which we live. But to really use that, the tools of geometry, which are of course lines, triangles, circles, points, squares, angles, to use those to understand more about ourselves and our spiritual origins, to understand more about the ethical corollary to metaphysical concepts, then we're really looking at meta geometry. We're going beyond just geometry as a mathematic concept, as just measuring things, and into meta geometry, which is measuring our souls. It's taking it to a dimension beyond just triangles, diagrams, lines, squares, spheres, circles, and bringing it to a metaphysical dimension. So thus we have the word metageometry. I'm going to just read a quote. It's a little bit of a long quote, so you bear with me. It's from The Secret Doctrine, the very beginning of the book. She starts to talk about geometry. It's that important. This is volume 1 from pages 1 through 7, so it's really right at the very beginning. She's describing a manuscript. She calls it an archaic manuscript, a collection of palm leaves made impermeable by some specific unknown process, impermeable to water, fire, and air. And on the first page is an immaculate white disc with a dull black background. So she's looking at a manuscript that has a page, and there's just a disc. I don't know how big it is, I don't know what else is on the page, but she says it has a dull black background. So something like that. And then on the following page, the same disc, but with a central point. Okay, so without getting too much further, the next page is the same disc, same mysterious black background, and then a central point. The first, the student knows to be cosmos in eternity. Cosmos in eternity. Before the reawakening of still slumbering energy. The emanation of the word in later systems. The point in the hitherto immaculate disk, space and eternity in pralaya, denotes the dawn of differentiation. It is the point in the mundane egg, the germ within the latter which will become the universe, the all, the boundless periodical cosmos, this germ being latent and active periodically by turns. The one circle is divine unity, from which all proceeds, and whither all returns. Its circumference indicates the abstract, ever incognizable presence, and its plane, the universal soul, although the two are one. Only the face of the disk being white and the ground all around black shows clearly that its plane is the only knowledge, dim and hazy though it is, that is attainable by man. It is on this plane that the manvantric manifestations begin. That's manifestations plural, not just this manifestation, but multiple manifestations. For it is in this soul that slumbers during the pralaya the divine thought. And she footnotes divine thought, and this is an important qualification that she gives here. She says, it is hardly necessary to remind the reader once more, although she does, that the term divine thought, like that of universal mind, must not be regarded as even vaguely shadowing forth an intellectual process, akin to that exhibited by man. And she goes on to describe that in more philosophical terms. So when we talk about the divine mind, divine thought, it's happening at a level that is so far beyond what we consider our own, rational thinking, that it's only used in the most abstract, symbolic way. So this point is really where everything begins. It's where differentiation starts, but there's still no actual physical world there. There's still no space. It's just there's nothing within space. It's just a sort of dimensionless point. She goes on to describe a series of geometric shapes, and we'll just run through those relatively quickly. She says the first illustration being a plain disk, in the same way. In the second, the archaic symbol shows a disk with a point in it, which is, as she said, the first differentiation in the periodical manifestations of the ever-eternal nature, sexless and infinite, the point in the disk or potential space within abstract space. In its third stage, the point is transformed into a diameter, So the point becomes a line across. It now symbolizes divine, immaculate Mother Nature within the all-embracing absolute infinitude. This is the all-embracing absolute infinitude. This is, the symbol for Mother Nature. When the diameter line is crossed by a vertical one, it becomes the mundane cross, or worldly cross. Humanity has reached its third root race. So there is a corresponding evolution of humanity that goes on with these stages of God geometrizing, as the first speaker used the term. It is the sign for the origin of human life to begin. When the circumference disappears, it leaves only the cross. And it is a sign that the fall of man into matter is accomplished. So we should remember this concept that the cross represents the fall of man into matter. This, of course, comes through all the way through into Christian belief, and that's that carnalization of the Christ principle. That's sort of a whole talk unto itself, but we can touch on it perhaps later. The cross within the circle symbolizes pure pantheism. When the cross was left uninscribed, it became phallic. It had the same and yet another meaning as the Tao described within it, a circle. That's this symbol. The circle is still there. This is the Tao. She says that when the arms of the cross within the circle withdraw from the edges, and we add motion, we have this symbol, which of course we recognize as the swastika, predating the Nazis and all of that. We're not really talking about that version of the symbol. They corrupted not only the concept of it, but the symbol itself. It's also called Thor's hammer or the Jaina cross, but it represents motion. Motion is another key concept to metageometry, which we'll touch on in a few minutes. There's also the vertical diameter representing the 0 and the 1, which gives us our number system. So these are kind of the geometric rudiments that she gives us to start with. Where we can take that is, into different areas. Elsewhere, she talks about the unfolded cube, how the point becomes the triangle. It has this undifferentiated existence, and then it splits, and it splits into two, and then these radiate into matter, splitting each one of these into two. And we end up with this figure, which represents the higher triad of our nature. It corresponds directly to the universe. The universe and man are a macrocosm and a microcosm, and this is the lower tetrad, sometimes also called lower quaternary. This represents Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, the three aspects of our higher nature, the reincarnating man. This represents our physical body, the four aspects of our lower nature: our physical body, the energy that provides life to that physical body, the desire nature, and those all exist, in service to the higher triad. We incarnate through the lower tetrad, and that same process is mirrored in the universe. At the same time, there's this like one once. She uses the phrase one once and two twice, and so these 2 points here become dual as well, radiating again from this, and we have the pyramid, which gives, our full 3 dimensions to the to the universe, to the world, everything. We can look at this in more basic geometric terms, that everything starts off with nothing, and then there's a point. That's the beginning of differentiation. When you add motion, this point becomes replicated in space and becomes a line. So the line, the point is 0 dimensions. The line is 1 dimension. It has length. And then once the line becomes replicated, in a certain direction, it has length and width. So 2 dimensions is where we have what we call a plane. We have length and width. So this is the point, the line, and the plane. And when this plane itself is replicated in multiple dimensions, it has to have motion into a 3rd dimension. Then we have length, width, and height. And this is where Descartes identifies, a system by which we can fix a certain point in space by, giving it a number. If we have to remember, of course, this goes infinitely in all directions, but we can assign a starting point arbitrarily, and say, if this is 0, 0, and this is infinity up here somewhere, we can say that this is, 5, and this is 4. And we can fix a certain point in space. We then add, how many layers deep are you? You can have it, so you're 5 over, you're 5 up, 4 over, and 3 down. Allows you to sort of lock in your physical world. Metageometry is taking it the next step and extrapolating this into yet another dimension. You can continue to do this; it becomes exponential, but it becomes abstract. Because we only have 3 operating dimensions to this incarnation, so we're kind of stuck. It's been supposed that there is the 4th dimension is time. That's not a spatial dimension, but a temporal dimension, and that is that this point can't exist. These layers, this cube, nothing can exist if it does not have duration. So of course, time does play a factor, but that's sort of like the 0 dimension. You don't have existence until you have this point which comes with that duration. It's as you add dimensions or it's as you add motion that you add dimensions, because the point doesn't really determine anything. It's when you have 2 points you determine a line. When you have a 3rd point, you determine a plane. So, and the plane has it's like for the same reason that a table with 3 legs will never rock, because those 3 legs are all determining that they're always going to find the flat plane. Once you add a 4th leg, then you have another dimension, and if one of them is not the same, then then that's why a 4-legged table will rock, if that makes any sense. And then when you add another point, you end up with another. You end up with the 3rd dimension, a cube, but you have to have that motion into that dimension to do it. So motion is a key symbol in all of this. I want to leave time for questions. There's this idea of the unfolded cube. I'll just show briefly. The Christian symbol of Christ on the cross, again, is that idea that spirit becomes crucified through matter. It becomes carnalized. It becomes made physical, and that's just like a symbol of that. The process can be described with a cube laid out flat. This is of course the Christian cross, which when folded becomes a cube. Now there are 11 ways to arrange these six sides, these six faces, 10 of which are not a cross. Actually, it can be a T, but this is the one that has philosophical significance, and the one that the literature points to as being important and worth looking at and studying. See if there's anything else important to go over. Are there any questions? We can open it up. Yes, please.
Difficult to come up with a question here. What sets into motion? What is the cause of? Does she say what is the cause of differentiation? In other words, when you have that disk, what is the reason or the cause of that one point originating, and then what causes the motion?
Yeah, there's. This is obviously and she actually says that the mind sort of teeters on the edge of paradox when you consider, these things, because you're talking about there is nothing there to cause it. There's nothing. Whenever we think of the word cause, there seems like there has to be something there to make something else happen, but it arises out of itself. This goes back to the quotation read from the Gita. Krishna says, "I establish this universe out of myself, yet remain separate." There's nothing there to cause anything. We use the word cause because it works for our sort of ratiocinative minds, but it doesn't really illuminate the full metageometrical action going on there. So I know that's kind of a dodge, but
and the motion part of it.
There again, it's like a natural impulse. It's the nature is that motion is built into it. It has to move. It has to begin evolving.
In other words, once the point originates, it's organic that it must continue.
Yeah.
I just had a thought in relation to that if you think of as a rough soul below, this chair will not move or have a motion unless there is a source, unless I'll kick it or something happens to it. So you have to apply source for it to produce motion. But I can just self-produce motion by myself. I can move it, I can move myself. Is it the moment of consciousness that propels that motion in the universe? That's going back to organic or maybe non-organic but conscious, that suddenly can self-propel itself.
Yeah, consciousness in the abstract at that point. Yes. Yes, please.
But the sacred doctrine also says that motion is eternal, that it never is never not. So when we go into pralaya, it gives a sensation because there's no one around to feel it, see it, know it, but that it's still there. The motion is inherent, as you said, but it never disappears. It's always there. And it, I think, explains it as the great breath when that process you just described starts into the evolution, that motion is abstract and it is eternal. So it is always there. And she says the spirit, when this process is going on for the manmantaric process, is the first differentiation of the root and substance, the next one from it. But in reality, there is no such thing. If they exist in eternity, this is just to make it understandable. Because also in the secret doctrine, because little students then spend a lot of time reading it, trying to understand it. And she says that you have to let your mind just go. Because in reality, there is no boundary to that circle. Now that is another kink she throws into it. That's, to this student's mind, that's a very difficult concept to
Right.
understand. So when you sit in meditation, you have to let your mind just go. Don't put any limitations on it. Just allow it to roam. Because she says that the point is everywhere and the circumference is nowhere.
It's a good conclusion.
Yeah.
There is no conclusion.
Just start with circumference. And then what's the point?
You're the point. Each one of us is the point.
Please.
That's a very interesting concept, right? That each one of us is the point, and who is at the center? We are all at the center.
Exactly.
Is it possible to equate, instead of the word motion, with vibration?
Yes.
Would the two be synonymous, that there always is vibration?
Well, vibration does connote duality, right? If this motion is absolute and abstract and always happening and persistent even during pralaya, then I think we might be talking about something different, because vibration is obviously an oscillation between two poles, of energy. So, although that certainly is motion, to this student's mind, that would be derivative in some way from the symbolic motion that we're talking about at the beginning of the Secret Doctrine.
I think she mentions light in reference to this question, that
Right.
when the white light representing spirit comes into being, then all the colors of the spectrum are within that white light, and that represents vibration.
Right.
Perhaps that would be a better.
So it's a later stage of manifestation where vibration comes in. You had your hand up? Okay. Go ahead.
What was the next question?
No, I wanted to make a small comment on the idea of the point. We're talking about how each one of us is the point, and the point is all. It reminded me of from the book, The Point. Point in every direction is the same as no point at all.
Right.
It just came to my mind.
Yeah.
Sort of,
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Important.
Very interesting. Did HPB talk about the structure of every structure as being that point, and then that maybe triangle? So is there sort of a classic example of every cell, every structure having that kind of formation to it, that sort of are the building blocks of life itself?
Yes, there's a lot in the Secret Doctrine about archetypes and about the astral being sort of the realm where sort of the blueprint for the physical, and paradigms, ideal forms. This concept definitely comes up a lot. It's part of the idea of universals to particulars, that there is a universal form on which all the particulars are based. So yeah, short answer, yes, it comes up a lot in the Secret Doctrine.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
I don't know where I saw it, whether it was in the writings, but there's a diagram for the structure of the universe. Have you come across it? It's a dodecahedron.
Oh, okay. No.
So there is a basic structure to the universe, and I think number 18 for the astral light, and 12 for this one, if I remember it correctly. It's been a long time ago. But she also tells us that the form is changeable, but its essence never is. And she relates that to the atomic structure in atoms, gods, and monads. You've read that.
Yeah, it's part of that. It's part of another pamphlet, part of the same series.
Yeah.
Secret Doctrine reference series. Yeah, I remember years back there was this observation that someone made that the structure of the distribution of galaxies, like when we got that Hubble wide field image from the Hubble telescope. There's just this the galaxies just seem to be kind of strewn about in a way that we couldn't really make sense of. It didn't seem to have any kind of geometric. It seemed random almost. But there was a clustering going on that betrayed something. That there was some kind of patterning. And someone had, I wish I could remember who, had the stroke of genius to bring it out to another dimension. The structuring ended up being kind of around things like circles of irregular size, so that the clusters were sort of in here. The galaxies tended to be in places like this, at these junctures of where these circles would come together. Essentially, it's the same pattern we see in suds. When you see bubbles, forming on the surface of water, where the bubbles come together, there's like little bubbles that kind of form and fill in the interstices between the bubbles and all that.
What are those circles?
These are just these weren't actually visible in the Hubble near field. All we could see were the
clusters.
Were these clusters that seemed to have some kind of shape to them, but it didn't seem to really make any sense. But once someone, I don't know if they actually looked at suds and saw the same pattern or not, but what you have to sort of perceive, which I'm not a very good artist, can't do it, but is that this is not just a circle, but it's a sphere, and it's a bubble, basically.
Circles within circles.
And they tend to bump up against each other, and the galaxies tend to be. And think about this. These are galaxies, which is just an inconceivably large thing. I mean, it's even just one tiny little part of our galaxy is huge. The Milky Way itself is.
It's behind it.
Yeah, incalculably vast, just ours. And in that Hubble, wide field image, I'm not sure if that's on there, but it just shows that there's just a galaxy of galaxies. It's a meta-galaxy,
So
if you will.
bubbles are some kind of a meta-galaxy, some constellations of something?
Yeah, well, it seems to be like if you
It's on that side.
if you were to like blow bubbles onto a piece of construction paper, let's say, and then after they pop, they leave behind little circles, and the distribution of bubble material is irregular in some way, but it does follow the pattern of where the bubbles used to be, and that was kind of the pattern. Not kind of, that is the very pattern that you see in.
That's the solar system. That's just a dot on the Milky Way. And
this is
that's a dot.
This is the Milky Way here.
Yeah.
And it's just one tiny little pinprick.
Yeah.
This itself is a tiny little pinprick amongst an infinite number, or I guess it's technically not infinite, but a vast number of galaxies.
Belongs to the local group. And that blows my mind. Our Milky Way belongs to the local group, and there are so many light years in between the two galaxies.
Right.
And yet,
this represents spiral represents that the same symbol that when the arms withdraw from the edge and you introduce motion, you have that rotation. The swastika is essentially the Milky Way.
Does it always rotate that direction?
They're all, if you look at that Hubble near field, they're all like every which way.
but the suggestion was also that it is so large, that's why we don't see the pattern.
Right.
That the human mind cannot figure it out because it is so extensive. Our human mind cannot grapple with it. It looks haphazard, but it is not. It is organized and it works on principle or law, whichever one you want to use. Just like this one does, that every globe works in a precision order and keeps to its rhythm, and the deciding factor is the sun.
Right.
In its center, it controls everything by its magnetic attraction.
If we were to, magnify the period at the end of that sentence and zoom way in on it, you'd see just the dark ink, and you'd see the fibers of the paper, but you couldn't extract from that what the whole pamphlet is about. You wouldn't even be into letters yet. It'd just be at the period. So that's what we're doing when we're looking at something like this. We're just seeing one tiny little piece of it.
Also, looking at it in
How much are we doing?
2 dimensions would make it like if you look at, oftentimes I find when you're doing geometry and you try to depict a 3-dimensional object on a 2-dimensional plane, unless you draw it with specific different kinds of lines, it can be difficult to understand what you're trying to picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so having 2-dimensional photographs can only give us so much. It would be even more if we could zoom around it. And that was reminding me of the movie Contact, when she was trying to figure out the instructions, and
Right.
it didn't make sense. None of it worked
Until someone
you put
folded the edges
exactly,
up.
you put it into 3 dimensions, and then the whole picture makes
This
sense.
process, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you can describe someone in a cube. It's like the book by Edwin Abbott, Flatland. I mean, people there, the characters are all made up of points, lines, circles. So Lineland is inhabited by people who are points, and they only know the people who are immediately next to them. They can't ever meet the person 2 points away, because and then people in Planeland, when they their experience of a sphere is as a circle, because it's just that 1-dimensional cross section or a 2-dimensional cross section. I mean, we have representations. We can represent a cube, on 2 dimensions, on a 2-dimensional surface. But as the commenter pointed out, we don't know if this is the floor of the cube, and we're looking in, and this is a wall, and this is it's like interior, or if we're looking at this point is coming out at us, or is it going in? So not having all the data about what's actually going on, a 2-dimensional picture doesn't really help. Then of course, there's the hypercube, which is the tetractys. HPV talks about this, which is a cube of cubes that exist. The square becomes a cube because it becomes unfolded into the 3rd dimension. The cube becomes a hypercube or tetractys because it unfolds into the 4th dimension. So we can draw, a hypercube, very rudimentary way. This connects. It's like it's impossible to get it, because it's actually not. Some people can do it, but it's difficult to get. It's a cube within a cube, but it's still a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional representation of a 4th dimensional object. The other way that it's represented is when it's unfolded, and it looks like this, only this is actually whole. I guess it doesn't. It looks like that, only in multiple dimensions. So
That's also a representation of a human being, isn't it?
yes. So then you have this one out here. This one out here. There's another one protruding out into this space here.
Yep.
And then this one goes back there. So probably have to get rid of that one there.
Yeah, it does good.
Also,
Something like that.
Wow.
Salvador Dali has an amazing painting of Christ on a hypercube. It's called Corpus Hypercubus or something like that. I can show it if you want to see it. But it represents this that God geometrizes, God draws out in the sense of meta, abstracts from the higher planes an experience for us. We being that God, an experience for us in these lower planes, these lower dimensions. Any other questions while I'm looking for this picture?
This is very significant, trying to understand that all that ever becomes is in the mind principle. That it's imprinted onto the Akashic light as to what is going to evolve.
That's I don't know if everybody can see it. Andra? mean, here, this talk about meta, this is self-reference. This is just, an illuminated digital representation of a painted two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional representation of a fourth-dimensional object unfolded. It gets very self-referent, like it's very deep, these layers. Plus, all of that really is just representing a concept, this concept of Christ. And so, if there is no actual physical Christ, then we're talking just about an idea. So.
That's very well done.
So, did you have a question?
Yeah, we're going from one thing
I know,
to the other, which is really fascinating. When I see that imagery, it's so beautiful because I had somebody say that, in that kind of figure and that stance, there's an openness, there's a willingness to embrace and an acceptance,
right.
And a forgiveness that comes with that concept you were talking about,
right.
Beyond the form itself. It seems like that if we're talking about geometry, metry, that axiomatically numbers come into alignment with what we're talking about also. And I remember taking the first Smithsonian, which talked about you can tell any story by numbers. So it seems as though the concept of number goes with the configuration of anything in proximity to each other. And the other thing that I wanted to say, it's kind of hard because I almost don't know what I'm saying, is that there may be a kind of perfection in terms of the Atma, the Buddhi, and the Manas that allows the human being or all of life to have a yearning towards that perfection. So there's a kind of balance that seems to be present, that when people are drawn to each other, when there are circumstances of relating to one another and relating to nature, that there's a kind of organic yearning for that balance, that if we are in one particular zone, we naturally yearn to be with someone who has the balance of what we're missing to be able to make that wholeness, if that makes any sense.
Well, it comes in from the very, very, very beginning. I guess it's in it's some of the Hindu literature. I think it's the Rig Veda says the phrase that is used there about the origins of everything like that. Where does that motion come from? Where does that first point come from, and why? It says desire first arose in it. That desire is really what makes everything happen.
The will.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what.
Well, the phrase then is behind will stands desire. That there's a desire first, and then will is a power of the mind to make your desires actually manifest. This goes all the way from the ancient Puranas and things like that to modern day law of attraction kind of philosophy.
So does HPB then talk about and get deeply involved in numbers and the balance of numbers and the meaning of numbers?
She does. I mean, she usually points to the Kabbalah because the Kabbalah seems to be the most well-preserved system of numerology. So she's always referring to that. There's in the stanzas of Zion, there's this whole treatise on the 3, the 1, the 4, the 1, and the 5, which of course is pi. And so, yeah, Secret Doctrine is full of references to numbers. She talks about the importance and significance and the sacredness of the number 7, so much that there was criticism during her time that Theosophists were called the sevening lunatics. Because we were the sevening, making a verb out of it, the sevening lunatics. Because, you can, of course, become obsessed with things like this and take it too far and have it, rule you rather than you rule it. But it would be like you'd have to stir your coffee 7 times. You'd have to wash your hands 7 times. I mean, it's like so many different things you can apply to, it's one thing to keep it in mind and make your life sacred through these sort of ceremonies and rituals and symbols and things. It's another to let it overtake your sense of reason. Can handicap you. there was one more thing I wanted to mention just about numbers, because in reference to like the photograph that we just showed. Because the photograph is a digital photograph, it represents a file, like a computer file, which, as most of us know, is just a, like a series of numerical data. I mean, it all comes down to one single very large number. Every computer file. If I take Romeo and Juliet, the whole text of it, and put it into a single file, that file can be represented by a very, very long series of zeros and ones. It has a number. It has a single number associated with it. You can take the Oxford English Dictionary, digitize it, it gets a number. It's a number different than the number assigned to Shakespeare, otherwise it would be Shakespeare. So every single, and think about the number of computer files we use and experience every single day. Every one of them has a unique number.
Or the HTTP, for the internet.
Even beyond that, certainly every internet site has a number assigned to it, an address. But if I take the smallest thing, just the letter A, and translate that into the numbers that the computer uses, it's something like 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. It goes on and on and on and on. I don't know what it actually is, but it's something like that. And it's going to be different in different computer systems. But if I take AB, you're just adding, more zeros and ones. Yeah. If I do all of Shakespeare, it just becomes a longer number. It's not any series of numbers. Really, you could convert this to our numbering system. 1 gazillion 500. It's like, you could convert it to that, but since it's a number so big, we no longer have names for things at that. We don't name numbers that big. I mean, you go up to like Googleplex and things like that, but Googleplex, sorry, because Google is aptly named, but Googleplex is the number Googleplex represents more atoms that are in the known universe, like all those galaxies we were talking about, and all the matter in all those galaxies, and every atom in all the matter of all those galaxies is still not as big as Googleplex. So it's like it becomes a very abstract thing very quickly. Okay, last thing, and we'll end. Yeah.
This is so interesting. Okay, so we have telephone numbers that have series of numbers, so that if you dial those numbers, you can connect to someone who is attached to that phone number. If you key in the website, configuration of all the different numbers, you will then call and connect to that website. Taking in connection to the concept that maybe that numbers are, I don't know, holding the universe together. I don't know how to actually say that, but are important. Is it possible and conceivable that our desire, which manifests in our will, contributes to our will, and then also our thoughts, that our thoughts can have a numerical value in a manner of speaking, so that our thoughts can connect to that law of attraction, like begets like, that depending upon the
it's almost
do you see
number
what I'm saying?
connecting to a number.
Yeah, that our thoughts, taking consider as in heaven, so in earth, that where we have something tangible with numbers, we can get intangible, but the same concept is happening with our thoughts, so that when we're thinking something, we're calling. I don't know how to say that. We're communicating a thought that others are picking up in a way that is not tangible, but they're feeling it.
Or not picking up.
Or not picking up, but it still is having its effect, either attracting something, calling something forth. Do you know what I'm saying? It has so many different possibilities.
There's a lot in that. There's a lot in that. But
Yeah.
I'd like to at least say, I think a lot of what you're talking about is metry.
Yes.
Okay, that's the measurement part. What does measurement mean? It means we're assigning a number to something. It's as soon as you have that point, we have one of something. We've just measured. We're now differentiating. That's that whole concept of going from the absolute abstract to the manifest. It begins with measuring something, with number. Nothing can exist. You cannot think without number. You cannot have clothes or hair, or nothing can exist without number. Number is, they say mathematics is the sort of the purest language. It's because it's so systematic, and that systematization process is drawing out of chaos and into cosmos. So of course, our thoughts, of course, are all happening according to number. It's number is energy, is matter, is spirit. It's all this constant process of becoming.
Vibrations, and each vibration is a different wavelength.
Exactly.
So it's conceivable that vibration, let's say music, beautiful music, can impact the consciousness of creation and raise the vibrations of it, that are, do you know what I'm saying? In service to creation.
Yeah. It's about corresponding vibrations, like you're saying. It's the, two well-tuned violins, you play the string on one, and that same string begins to vibrate on the other. Yeah, no one's touching it. It's just a physical law.
I can say this again.
If you have, it even works with a piano. If you have a well-tuned piano in the room, and you play a perfect note on the violin, the string in the piano will begin to vibrate.
Interesting. You mean the corollary string? Let's say if it's an A on the guitar,
will vibrate over there. Yeah.
The A on the string that controls the A vibration on the piano will vibrate.
Right. You play the note nice and clear and strong. As long as you hit it right, you stop it. You can hear it in the piano. Nobody's touching it. It's all happening through the air. The vibrations, the atoms go out, and it hits the string. But only the string that's tuned to that same vibratory rate is going to vibrate.
Is there some fight up on this?
Yeah.
It's in the
I know
literature.
it sounds crazy, and I always have a hard time.
You can do it.
I remember exactly what
I
it
play
is.
the violin, and occasionally, if I happen to be, I don't know to anyone how good anyone's real ability to tune an instrument is, but occasionally you get, if I'm playing with my teacher, for example, you get it right on. And every time that, you're just holding my violin or something, and that note plays, I can feel it under my finger. And I was like, oh wow, I wonder if that will ever happen. I just never really thought that would be something I would experience. I just thought it'd have to be exactly, and yet it's happened multiple times to me. It always kind of surprises me. It's like, oh wow, it's like because you can feel it. It's just very strange. But
it's the same principle as if you put your hand on here and I hit this, you can feel it in your hand. There's a medium through which the vibrations can transfer over to here. This is a very sloppy, messy, and precise relative to the note on a musical scale. But the same process is happening there. The strings vibrate the air, the sound carries through. Enough of it passes through the wood and hits the string in the piano. But only one string in there is tuned to correspond. And this is why music works. Because there's a temperament. There's a scale that sounds harmonious when it's all used together, and that's why everyone's instruments are tuned the same way, and why when one note doesn't sound right, it's because it's not tuned to everybody else. It also brings in the idea that we build these things with harmony, that they have lasting value. Like a well-tuned violin, you play it and it just sings, the note carries. But if it's not, the note tends to dissipate. It doesn't have any reinforcement in the instruments around it, etc. So the Gestalt process, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's the essence of a symphony.
Doesn't the secret doctrine say that the only quality of Akasha is sound? That if it wasn't there, we would not be able to hear it.
Right.
Or vibration would not be
Sound,
able to
vibration,
express itself through
number.
the air.
Right. So if God geometrizes, certainly as we are that God, we geometrize.
Yeah, we create everything with love.
Yeah, absolutely.
based on the vibrations thing, I once saw a program, and it was I think on the Discovery Channel. They're talking about building this structure. people had to go through and say you couldn't play certain songs because if you got everybody jumping up and down this proper rhythm, the whole thing would collapse. Because if you hit the same vibration as the material, the concrete, whatever it was made with, it would just fall apart.
That's
So there were, you know, there are
And this is like
songs-
200 stories in the air, so falling apart is really a bad thing.
Yeah, so if you have, 400 people, all stepping to the same beats per minute, and if that beats per minute coincides with the vibratory rate of this structure,
It begins to oscillate beyond its physical, like
Yeah,
its
and
design
it's-
parameters, and could threaten the integrity of the
it's
structure.
the same reason that if you play, the string, and it's set to the same vibratory rate as the other string, it sets the other string going.
How our thoughts actually are the same way.
Yes.
How our thoughts are the same way, depending on which plane we are functioning, because that plane, as you said, there are 7, and the thought process corresponds with one of those levels of consciousness, and it is color coordinated, as Queen said, because the vibration is intoning a color. So depending where you are and how your thought processes are, your vibration is, as you said, spreads, and those who are at the same level as you will receive that thought from you. So we are really potent creators in our world, and we just don't realize it.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't next week's talk.
Thank you.
I thought you were in
The mystery of individuality.
The mystery of individuality.
Postpone, there's a long weekend.
Thank you.
We might want to